You can ask some questions like, well, do men and women differ? And so what you do is you just give the questionnaire. You can either fill it out yourself or have other people fill it out on your behalf. So, and it could be a teacher, it could be a parent, you know, and that's all being done. And what you find is there are systematic differences between men and women. And the biggest differences are that women experience more negative emotion and that they're more agreeable than men. So, and that's borne out by the psychiatric evidence, because higher levels of negative emotion are manifested in depression and anxiety, and women are diagnosed with higher levels of depression and anxiety all around the world. And with agreeableness, that's also borne out by the clinical literature in some sense, the medical literature, socio-medical literature, because disagreeable people are more likely to be incarcerated, because it's the best predictor of being incarcerated, even though it's not a very good predictor. And men are incarcerated at about a 10-to-1 rate compared to women, and are more likely to be antisocial and conduct disordered. So the personality differences are mirrored in the socio-medical literature. Okay, so there are differences, but then there's a question. Are those differences a consequence of socialization, or are they biological? And the answer to that is tricky, because how much something is social and how much it is biological actually depends on the social circumstances. So, well, here's an example. If you have a society where no one has enough to eat and people are starving, then there's a huge cultural effect on people's intelligence, let's say, that's mediated by economic factors, even though it's got a biological origin, right? The starvation. So the relationship between biology and culture is actually partly culturally dependent, so it makes it complicated. But in any case, here's how the scientists decided to address this. They thought, well, why don't we rank order countries by how egalitarian their social policies are, which you can do with a fair degree of reliability. You know, you put the countries where women are second-class citizens at the bottom, and you'd put the Scandinavian countries at the top. You can get good reliability across raters for how you'd rate those countries. And then look at the magnitude of the differences between men and women by the egalitarian social policies. And so then you'll find out, and here's the hypothesis. If the differences between men and women are primarily social, then as cultures become more egalitarian, men and women will become more alike. That's not what happened. The opposite happened. The more egalitarian the society, and it turns out the richer the society, because that's also being discovered now, the more different men and women become. And so the differences are not huge. So with agreeableness, for example, if you took the average man, if you took a typical man and a typical woman out of the population just randomly, and you had to bet that the woman was more aggressive than the man, you'd be wrong 60% of the time. So there's quite a bit of overlap, right? Because you'd be right 40% of the time. But the problem is that a lot of selection takes place at the extremes. Maybe you're only concerned about disagreeable people when they become violent, and maybe it's only the 1 in 50 most disagreeable person who's violent, and they're all men. So you can have quite a bit of similarity at the average level and big differences at the extremes. And the extremes is where people do things like employment selection. So the biggest difference that's been discovered between men and women, and this is the one that gets biggest in the Scandinavian countries, is interest. Men are more interested in things, and women are more interested in people. And it's a big difference. It's 1 full standard deviation. And so what that means is that if you are a man, you would have to be more interested in people than 85% of men to be as interested in people as the 50th percentile woman. And you'd have to be more interested in things than 85% of women to be as interested in things as the typical man.
And how do you define things? Objects?
Gadgets.
Okay.
Gadgets.
Oh,
things.
Okay.
Non-animate things.
Cars.
Yeah. Tools.
Yeah.
You know, technology.
Right.
STEM fields. Because the other thing that's happened is that the more egalitarian the society, the fewer women go into the STEM fields. The fewer.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So now this unravels in a big way. It's like this is a hugely relevant issue politically, because it means that you cannot have equality of opportunity and equality of outcome at the same time. It's not possible, because as you make your society more egalitarian and you open up the opportunity for equality of outcome, you increase how different men and women are, and that changes their occupational choice. So if men are more interested in things, which they are by a substantial margin, then way more of them are going to be engineers.